Welcome to Military Analytics. In the last days of the Russo-Ukrainian War, the front line has become highly complex. Successive Russian groups, which had been under constant pressure from Ukrainian soldiers, started disbanding. This situation has created unrest within the Russian army, while revealing the extent of Ukraine's territorial dominance. However, this audacious operation has literally trapped the Russians. Recently, the Ukrainian army has ushered in a new era of defense. It is evident that Russia has been unable to make any significant advances in several contested areas like Soledar and Bakhmut, where it sought to establish superiority. Ukraine deliberately employed a retreat tactic, while the complacency of the Russian army in these regions demonstrated the complexity of the situation. At this point, Ukrainian troops mobilized and continued the operation, seen as the culmination of the diversionary retreat in Bakhmut. The entire Ukrainian army mobilized, unsure whether the Russian army could push its troops back near Bakhmut and Soledar. Firstly, the Ukrainian army conducted intensive intelligence work in Bakhmut. Subsequently, based on the intelligence, Putin deployed as many Russian troops as possible to the front line. Unaware of such an attack, Russia did not anticipate a strong defense from Ukraine, as the necessary weapons and ammunition for Russian troops were located behind the front lines. Upon realizing this, the Ukrainian army devised an unthinkable plan, recognizing that the Russian forces were positioned to respond to attacks from the Ukrainian side. There was no reason for Ukraine not to deliver the final blow, and thus, the Ukrainian troops mobilized to make a decisive breakthrough at a point where the Russians would be most desperate. The Russian forces and soldiers in Bakhmut would be completely defeated. The Ukrainian army deployed its tanks primarily near Bakhmut. A surprise attack on the Russian troops was crucial for the success of this operation. Ukrainian soldiers formed a unit of elite troops, who would execute a small-scale but highly effective attack, opening the way for Ukraine to infiltrate from behind. At this crucial moment, a significant upheaval occurred in the Russian army due to Putin's latest decision. The Wagner Group exposed the secret plan of the Russian troops in Bakhmut. The founder of Wagner, Prigozhin, kept the Wagner soldiers and the Russian army 4 kilometers away from the front line, a fact soon discovered by the Ukrainian army. However, the Ukrainian army immediately mobilized to launch an attack on the front line using tanks and armored vehicles. Ukrainian soldiers initiated the aforementioned frontal attack, while a small number of Ukrainian soldiers advanced towards the Russian army. Recognizing this, the Russian army initially took a defensive position, but considering the small number of Ukrainian soldiers, they dismissed it as a popular resistance and launched an offensive against the Ukrainians, disobeying their commander's orders. The Ukrainian soldiers, familiar with the terrain, quickly dispersed to the surrounding area. However, the Russians faced a significant disadvantage, and upon their return to the front, a big surprise awaited them. The Ukrainian army, utilizing its inventory of tanks, completely surrounded the Russian front line in Bakhmut from both sides. The Russian army found itself unable to respond to this decisive move by the Ukrainians, lacking the necessary ammunition and weapons to fight against Ukraine. The Russians, despite their desire for a full-blown conflict, faced a severe backlash. The Ukrainian army officially won the battle in Bakhmut. Simultaneously, Ukraine launched an offensive on the front line, placing the Russian soldiers in a difficult situation and effectively cornering the Russian army, leaving them unsure of what to do. Thanks to this successful operation, Ukrainian soldiers captured over 10,000 Russians, marking the most significant achievement against Russia since the war began. While the Ukrainian army intended to replicate this success in Soledar, an unexpected development occurred. When the Ukrainian army advanced towards Soledar, another area witnessing intense fighting with the Russians, they encountered an unexpected situation. The Russian army had already relocated all its troops from the south towards Bakhmut. Consequently, the Ukrainian army couldn't fully exploit its operation in this area, although it managed to capture a considerable number of Russian soldiers. Upon their return to Kiev, the Ukrainian soldiers were hailed as heroes. This latest development drove Putin into a frenzy, prompting him to take a drastic step in foreign policy. The international community was well aware of Russia's destabilizing actions in recent days, but no one anticipated such a significant move. Russia's decision to deploy nuclear missile systems in Belarus, its only ally, caused a massive controversy, leading to the loss of all its friends in foreign policy. The countries engaged in discussions about these actions believed that urgent measures were required to counter Putin. It is known that when Putin realized Russia was on the verge of losing the war, he resorted to imposing sanctions and threats on the countries supporting Ukraine. However, Ukraine's resolute response rendered all of Putin's desired results unattainable. The Russian military is increasingly aware of its diminishing chances against Ukraine following these recent tensions. Therefore, it is believed that Ukraine can win the war without external intervention. As a result, Russia's move has created significant trouble in foreign policy, albeit without stirring a strong domestic reaction. However, other countries have expressed severe condemnation towards Putin. Notably, even countries considered the economic center of the world reacted strongly. The G7 countries, denouncing Putin's latest policies, made a shocking decision. They announced that the embargoes on Russia would be escalated, fearing that the Putin administration's actions could trigger a global nuclear war. At this critical juncture, an unexpected country made a crucial move. It became evident that many countries, including those in the Eastern Bloc, were willing to impose sanctions on Putin and support Ukraine. Japan stood out with its critical commentary supporting Ukraine. The commentary highlighted Russia's escalating tensions worldwide due to erratic moves, emphasizing the high probability of a potential outbreak of World War III if these tensions continue to rise. This motivated Japan, which had already provided approximately $550 million in support to Ukraine since the war's onset, to increase its support by 11-fold in response to Russia's actions. As preparations for the spring operation against Russia reach completion, the situation has become promising for the Ukrainian army. It is expected that the Ukrainian army will completely drive out Russian forces from the country. The Freedom Movement, initiated by the Free Russian Legion in the city of Belgorod, increased its influence over time and spread to other cities of Russia. The effects of the war were felt as Belgorod crossed the Sea of Azov beyond the Crimean Peninsula and reached as far as the Russian cities of Krasnodar, Bryansk, and Rostov. The Russian army's missile retaliation against the cities of Kiev and southern Ukraine did not deter the Ukrainians. The Great Attack, which started with the major breakthrough of the Russian Freedom Legion to the city of Belgorod in Russia, also targeted Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Mariupol with long-range missiles and UAVs. At the same time, Ukraine launched a massive wave of attacks on Russia's southern and western cities to cut Russian logistics lines and paralyze the main supply routes of the Russian army. The most critical of these took place in the Krasnodar and Rostov regions in the south. The war had now moved to Russia. An attack occurred in the Rostov region near Krasnodar, one of the recently targeted Russian cities. Rostov and Krasnodar, located on the coast of the Sea of Azov and forming the southern cities of Russia, are the main supply points of the Russian army on the Crimean and Donbass fronts. Russian air defense systems went on alert after the Ukrainian drone and missile attack in Rostov. The governor of Rostov Oblast in the Russian Federation, Vasily Golubev, claimed that the Russian air defense shot down a Ukrainian missile in the Morozovsk region, where there is a military airspace. The Ukrainian side also made critical statements regarding the attacks, causing panic and anxiety among the residents of the region. Ukrainian military channels reported an attack on a Russian airfield at the same time a missile crashed in Krasnodar. These statements confirmed that the Ukrainians had hit the Russian military base in Rostov. Witnesses also reported hearing the sound of a moat before the two explosions occurred in Krasnodar in southern Russia. Among the claims that Ukraine attacked Russia, the first video footage of the attacks on the Russian air base in Rostov appeared. The video footage showed a drone crashing into military installations in Krasnodar, about a 6-hour drive from the Ukrainian border in southern Russia. The video frames captured the concerns of Krasnodar residents and their escape after the explosions, providing remarkable details. On the other hand, the Russian authorities continued making statements in order not to cause an atmosphere of concern in Krasnodar. The Russian media agency BASA claimed that the attack on the military airfield in the Rostov region was averted after the successful downing of a missile moving at the speed of 5,000 km per hour at an altitude of 17 kilometers. Currently, Russian intelligence officials are working to detect and collect parts of the missile that was shot down in Krasnodar. These operations are vital to carry out a detailed analysis and determine the missile type, its source, as well as the possible target of an attack. According to a set of assumptions, the Grom-2 tactical missile struck the Russian military base in Rostov, as its range is sufficient to reach from such a distance. However, there are no official results on this yet. On the other hand, according to Krasnodar Mayor Yevgeny Naumov, the attack damaged an office building and a residential building on Morskaya Street. But one of the most important details of these attacks was that the military airspace in Rostov, which served as a base for Russian bombers, was located 3 kilometers from Morozovsk. This situation involved a serious risk factor for the Russian Air Force because the Russian Air Force often used this air base to carry out offensive operations on Ukrainian territory. The Russian military base, which was used to attack Ukrainian territory from the Crimean direction, played an important role in the occupation of cities such as Berdyansk and Mariupol. However, it is unclear whether the bombers currently at the Rostov air base were harmed by this attack. According to intelligence reports, Russian authorities can move their planes from Rostov airspace to safer areas. The reason for this is the possibility of another possible attack, because military analysts and war experts stated that in the large-scale offensive, Ukrainian planes would target some Russian cities in the direction of the Azov Sea and around Crimea. In fact, these predictions of war experts predate the attacks on Krasnodar, so the predictions were correct. The fact that there was activity again in Krasnodar after the attack on the Russian military airbase in Rostov brought to mind that these estimates were not sufficient, and the offensive operations would continue increasingly immediately after the attack in Rostov. Residents of the Krasnodar territory found a kamikaze plane on one of the beaches. Apparently, the drone crashed into the water during its flight. The type of drone has not yet been named, but its design features and dimensions show that this UAV had a clear resemblance to the Garan drone. The drone appeared to have been in the water for quite some time. However, it is still unknown whether the drone was carrying any explosives. Therefore, it is not yet possible to definitively judge what kind of danger this drone poses. It is assumed that the identity of the UAV and the circumstances of its appearance on the coast of the Krasnodar territory will become clear in the near future. It is also suspected that the UAV on the beach in Krasnodar is a Ukrainian drone because, as we mentioned the previous day, Rostov Air Base was hit in this city. After these suspicious and mysterious situations, Moscow authorities lost control and had to watch the attacks on Russian cities like spectators. After these dramatic attacks, the Russians transformed Crimea from a popular seaside resort into a military defensive line, with satellite images showing the peninsula overrun with anti-tank barriers and crisscrossed by reinforced trench nets. Because the Russian authorities thought that the axis of the attacks would gradually surround Crimea, the inhabitants of the peninsula were also quite worried about this possibility, although they did not explicitly state it. As you know, the Russian Ministry of Defense recently reported an attack on the Project 18-80, the Yuri Ivanov-class intelligence ship Ivan Kowers in the Black Sea, about 90 miles northeast of the Turkish Strait. This offensive operation also managed to keep alive the fears of the Russians in the Azov and Black Sea. With a rise in tension in Crimea and the surrounding regions, Russia aimed to reduce the risk to the lowest level by calling Navy forces to these regions. For this reason, the Ivanka's ship of the Black Sea Fleet continues to fulfill its duties, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense. According to the publication of the Black Sea Fleet, the medium reconnaissance ship Ivan Kurs is returning to Sevastopol. In addition to the attacks on Russian cities, Moscow continued to pursue its invasion plans in Ukraine. Kremlin forces attacked a medical clinic in Dnipro, central Ukraine, killing a 69-year-old passerby and another civilian. Ukrainian authorities reported that more than 20 people were injured, including 2 children. Additionally, a Russian S-300 missile struck a dam in the Karlivka district of eastern Ukraine's Donetsk province, putting nearby settlements under the threat of severe flooding. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the explosion in Dnipro as a war crime. After these attacks by Russia, security measures were increased in Ukraine while the Russians were waiting for an opportunity to continue their attacks. Activity began again on the borderlines between Ukraine and Russia. Governor Vitez Slavgladkov reported that the town of Grave Aran in Belgorod, about 7 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, came under fire for several hours, with 4 houses, a store, a car, a gas pipeline, and a power line damaged. This city, as we told you at the beginning of the video, is where the Free Russian Legion group carried out their historic offensive operations in the village of Glovo, close to the border. An entertainment center, a shop, and an uninhabited house were damaged. According to Gladkov, there were no casualties. Following this week's attack, the governors of Belgorod and Kursk have expressed their support for changing the law to allow local volunteer self-defense units to arm when necessary. In other words, the Russians began to fear because of the attacks that took place in their own cities. Therefore, Russian officials argued that arming such forces could save the defense ministry from having to divert some of the troops it needs on the front line to respond to similar raids in the future. However, the possibility that Russian cities will witness attacks will continue in the coming days because no Russian city is safe until the war in Ukraine is over. If a soldier does not dare to be shot by guns or face death, he cannot escape for his life. When we hear this word for the first time, it sounds quite ambitious. And given the danger, the number of people who can escape remains limited. However, extraordinary situations such as war make people more fearless about dangers. In the war on the lands of Eastern Europe, we have repeatedly witnessed revolts and desertions. The latest example of this situation occurred yesterday. Several dozen armed convicts fleeing the Luhansk region caused mayhem in Rostov. 39 armed soldiers from the Stormzy detachment fled Lysychansk in Ukraine's occupied Luhansk region. The deserted soldiers were all ex-convicts who went to fight under contract. During the escape, a soldier from the self-proclaimed LPR Ministry of State Security was killed while trying to stop the deserters. According to the bulletin, armed conflicts are traveling in several cars, possibly in plain clothes, and with other people's documents. Police officers of the Rostov region have strengthened patrol posts at checkpoints with LPR. The information has also been conveyed to the heads of administration of the border regions. The General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces also provided information about this case in the morning. Summary: according to the Ukrainian military, about 20 former Russian prisoners who had recently undergone accelerated training and arrived in the Svatov settlement to strengthen the contingent of Russian forces stole a com truck and disappeared in an unknown direction. The whereabouts of the deserting Russian soldiers are currently unknown. Previously, Russia had created military prisons to hold mobilized soldiers who were detained and arrested. Such a step was taken to reduce the number of cases of desertion and voluntary desertion of troops, which have recently become more frequent in the Russian Federation's army. In addition, the situation was quite dire for the soldiers who could not escape from the front lines. As it is known, the heart of the war continues to beat on the eastern axis. Following the reported Ukrainian attack on a Russian position, a massive explosion occurred on the Bakhmut front line, leaving a huge mushroom cloud in the countryside. Some have reported that this was a damn air attack. The video from the clashes in the ruins of the city shows how chaotic and apocalyptic wars can be. In the clip posted on social media platforms, it can be seen that 2 Wagner fighters tried to suppress the Ukrainian position, but fled for cover when it was believed that they had come under mortar fire and were hit by friendly fire. Also, clashes in the Donbass continue to be intense, with a combat montage from Ukraine's 28th Mechanized Brigade showing clashes along the Donetsk-Donbass Canal near the village of Kozhumayka. The troops can be seen hitting a Russian position with an 84mm squared Carl Gustaf recoilless rifle, 30mm squared to a 42 automatic cannon fire from a M2, and a T-72 firing from high with a 125mm squared to a 46mm main gun. On the other hand, the Ukrainian border guard stormed Bakhmut again the other day. Aerial reconnaissance of the border unit detected a group of Russian infantrymen moving on the outskirts of Bakhmut. The Russian infantry decided to wait in a dilapidated building, but the Russians had made perhaps the biggest mistake of their lives. The Russian soldiers who were located were eliminated by the successful shots of these snipers. The Russian casualty losses have also been updated with the latest attacks. The Ukrainian armed forces eliminated about 206,200 Russian invaders. The losses of the Moscow army are not limited to soldiers. At the same time, the Russians are shaken by losses of military equipment. The war in Ukraine is becoming more and more striking every day. Social media continues to show images showing how Putin's forces were destroyed by US and Western weapons. As time goes on, things get worse for Moscow. In the aerial footage shared on social media, it is seen that 2 Russian self-propelled howitzers were shot down by the Ukrainian army. Two howitzers are parked behind trees by the dirt road. These howitzers are hit by an X-caliber shell. In the footage, it is seen that two cars parked in a row were hit multiple times. Ukraine Weapons Tracker, a Twitter account that monitors the war in Ukraine, explains how the two shells landed in almost the same spot and destroyed both vehicles in quick succession. The M982 Excalibur is an American-made long-range guided artillery shell. The projectile is equipped with GPS guidance systems designed to make it one of the most advanced and accurate artillery shells in the world with a range of 40 miles, according to U.S. tests. It has since proven to be a valuable addition to Ukraine's arsenal. A report published in April of this year revealed that more than 3,000 shells have been sent to Ukraine so far, and they have received a lot of praise from Ukrainian military officials. Valery Ilyuzhny, Ukraine's highest military general, shared a video clip of Excalibur bullets in action on his Facebook page last month. In the clip, a Ukrainian soldier can be seen praising the American shell and describing how important they have become to launch quick and accurate attacks on Russian positions. Meanwhile, the UK Ministry of Defence has confirmed the possibility of Wagner Group PMC forces withdrawing from some of their positions around Bakhmut. Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin had previously stated that the mercenary group would hand over its positions to the Russian Ministry of Defense, while Wagner would rebuild its fighting force after months of brutal attacks on the now devastated city. The update also noted that the separatist forces of the Russian-backed self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic had entered Bakhmut for purge operations, and the 31st Brigade of the Russian Airborne VDV had strengthened its positions on Bakhmut flanks. Ukrainian counterattacks on the flanks of Bakhmut captured an area of about 20 kilometers squared. Ukrainian threats to Russian forces around the city will likely force Wagner to make a controlled retreat, despite the ongoing conflict between Prigozhin and the Russian Ministry of Defense. Wagner will be used in a forward offensive operation in the Donbass after being rebuilt behind the lines. However, the Institute for War Studies reported that the Wagner Group, probably independently of the Russian Ministry of Defense, exchanged 106 Ukrainian POWs for an unknown number of Russian POWs. Prigozhin's separate but related feud with Russian mill blogger Igor Girkin may soon culminate when Girkin accuses Prigozhin of preparing for a Wagner-led coup. Girkin specifically suggested that if Prigozhin's Ukrainian counteroffensive were successful, he could take advantage of the political chaos that could encircle Russia. In another development, Ukraine's shaping operations, both kinetic and psychological, intensified as the counterattack felt closer and closer. On the front line and in the outline, Ukrainian forces appear to be making final preparations for the long-awaited counteroffensive with the help of Western-supplied equipment. According to senior Ukrainian officers and spokespersons, the counteroffensive has already begun, blunting Russia's winter offensive in Donbass and enduring almost endless airstrikes against targets across the country. Ukraine's presidential advisor, Mikhailo Podolyak, stated that the counteroffensive is not a complex process. It is not a matter of a specific date or time. Podolyak said that certain processes are already taking place, such as the deoccupation process and the destruction of supply lines or the blowing up of warehouses behind the lines. Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council Secretary, Alexei Danilov, said that a counteroffensive could begin tomorrow, the day after, or within a week, but that Ukraine could not afford to make a mistake. In summary, the Ukrainian counteroffensive may not begin with sudden simultaneous attacks, but rather an increase in the rhythm of shaping operations to prepare the battlefield for several days or even weeks. Every offensive behind the line, every raid that pushes the Russian forces away from the front, and indeed, every psychological warfare brings Ukraine one step closer to the launch of its artillery and mechanized troop attacks. Follow us to be informed about new developments instantly. Thanks for watching.